December 2nd, 1993. A rooftop in a poor district of Medellín. On the sun-scorched sheet metal lies the body of a man in jeans and a checkered shirt. A thin trickle of blood runs down his face. Around him, policemen, agents, journalists. It is Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, the man who for years held Colombia in an iron grip. The boss of all bosses. The king of cocaine. The richest criminal in history. The world watches. In newsrooms in New York and London, they speak of the end of the cocaine era. Washington declares victory in the war on drugs. And Colombia hopes the worst is over. But that is an illusion, because the system Escobar built survived, and it was already waiting to take his place. Pablo died, but his empire did not vanish. He left behind hundreds of properties, villas with pools, ranches larger than towns, hidden warehouses. Underground, not only millions of dollars in plastic bags and barrels, but also diamonds, gold coins, and bullion. In the forests and mountains, abandoned cocaine labs ready to be restarted. On sleeping airstrips, private planes and helicopters. In garages, fleets of armored cars, sports machines, and smuggling trucks. Even today, stories circulate in Colombia of farmers who, while plowing their fields, struck wooden crates full of cash or bags of diamonds, and of those who, after such a discovery, disappeared forever. The death of Escobar did not end his story. It opened a new chapter, and Colombia was yet to discover that after the fall of the king, new players would step onto the throne, even more ruthless than before. After Escobar's death, Colombia did not become safe. Violence did not disappear. It simply changed shape. Onto the stage stepped the Cali cartel, elegant, discreet, without the flashy media spectacle of Medellín. Their bosses, the Rodriguez Orejuela brothers, didn't blow up buildings. They sent envelopes stuffed with cash. Instead of waging war on the state, they bought it. They had people in parliament, at airports, in the police, even in the prosecutor's office. By the mid-1990s, Cali controlled up to 80% of Colombia's cocaine exports. Their strength lay in logistics. They used the ports of Buenaventura and Tumaco, ran their own export companies, and had a fleet of legitimate container ships. Cocaine was hidden in shipments of bananas, coffee, or flowers. They were the narcos in suits, and it worked, because there were no shootouts in the headlines, no car bombs, no sudden explosions in downtown Bogotá. For the average Colombian, it meant one thing: less chaos in the streets, but the same terror lurking in the shadows. When the government dismantled the Cali cartel in the mid-1990s, a new monster rose from its ashes: the Norte del Valle cartel. They had no single Pablo. Instead of one leader, a council of bosses. Instead of open war, perfect secrecy. Their specialty was large-scale cooperation with the Mexican cartels, especially Sinaloa. Colombians produced, Mexicans carried the product into the United States. Thanks to this division of labor, Norte del Valle avoided the harshest crackdowns. They were also pioneers in smuggling technology, submarines, ultralight aircraft, even tunnels under borders. They produced so much that at one point they controlled over 60% of Colombia's cocaine exports. But their success came at a price. Internal wars over influence eventually led to a bloody collapse. After Escobar's death, Colombia no longer had its rock stars of the drug trade. There was no boss whose name everyone knew. No figure on newspapers, tattoos, or market T-shirts. Today's cartel leaders avoid the spotlight like the plague. They live in gated mansions, in luxury apartments in Panama, Miami, or Madrid. They don't flaunt gold chains. They don't pose with llamas and tigers for family albums. Their strength lies in the fact that they remain unseen. These are Narcos 2.0, businessmen in the shadows. Instead of buying the love of the poor, they buy the silence of officials. Instead of waging war on the police, They pay the police not to ask questions. The key to their power is the globalization of trafficking. Colombian cartels have become suppliers for Mexico's giants, Sinaloa and CJNG, who control the entry of cocaine into the United States. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. Colombians don't have to risk direct smuggling into the U.S. Mexicans are guaranteed access to pure, cheap cocaine in wholesale quantities. The cooperation runs so deep that Mexican sicarios sometimes train Colombian gangs in modern execution methods, while Colombian chemists teach Mexicans advanced techniques of refining cocaine. When Escobar disappeared, other forces rushed into the vacuum. The left-wing guerrillas of FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, began to control the coca plantations in the jungle. Farmers were forced to pay a revolutionary tax in cash or in product. On the other side appeared the paramilitaries of AUC, the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia. Right-wing, ultra-brutal, financed by wealthy landowners, corporations, and sometimes the very same cartels that also funded FARC. By the 1990s, Colombia had become a country of three wars: the state versus the left versus the right, and everyone versus everyone else over cocaine. Villages in the Amazon disappeared from the map. Entire communities massacred for allegedly supporting one side or the other. On the outskirts of Medellín and Cali, mass graves appeared, still being uncovered today by UN teams. The year 2000. Washington and Bogotá announced the launch of Plan Colombia. Goal: destroy cocaine production and dismantle the guerrillas. Budget: over $10 billion in the years to come. American Black Hawk helicopters patrol the jungle. Coca fields are sprayed with herbicides from the air. Farmers lose their crops, not only coca, but food as well. Thousands of families flee the fumigated zones. For a moment it seemed to work. The surface of coca plantations shrank. But it was an illusion. Farmers simply moved their fields deeper into the jungle, closer to the borders with Venezuela and Ecuador. Cocaine production quickly returned to pre-operation levels, and even surpassed them. Cocaine is not just a crime. It is a pillar of parts of Colombia's economy. At its peak, it accounted for 3 to 4% of the country's GDP. The value chain is simple. A farmer in Putumayo or Cauca sells a load of coca leaves for $200 to $300. In a processing lab, that load becomes a kilogram of pure cocaine, already worth $2,000 to $3,000. In the U.S. or Europe, the price rises to $30,000 to $50,000. The difference in price is pocketed by smugglers, middlemen, and dealers. And this is the kind of money that, in poor regions, buys the loyalty of entire villages. Colombia is not only Bogotá, Medellín, and the tourist paradise of Cartagena. It is also hundreds of kilometers of jungle, mountains, and coastline, where the state exists only on paper. There are provinces where the army enters only in convoys, with heavy equipment and helicopters on standby, and even then, only briefly, because in many places, the real power belongs to local militias, smugglers, and armed groups tied to the cartels. The borders are the true arteries of the cocaine empire. With Venezuela, armed groups flee there when the heat rises. On the Venezuelan side are camps, warehouses, and transfer points. With Panama, the infamous Darien Gap, a stretch of jungle with no roads, a paradise for smugglers, a nightmare for the army. These regions are not only smuggling corridors, they are also production zones, laboratories deep in the jungle hidden from drones and satellites. In 2016, the world celebrated. Colombia signed a peace agreement with FARC after more than half a century of civil war. President Juan Manuel Santos received the Nobel Peace Prize. The media wrote of a new era for the country, but in the provinces, the reality was different. Some former guerrillas laid down their arms and entered politics, but thousands of others, frustrated that the promised aid came late or not at all, returned to the jungle, this time as FARC dissidents, stripped of ideology, focused entirely on the cocaine business. The vacuum left by FARC was quickly filled by others: ELN, Clan del Golfo, and local gangs. New wars for territory began, and caught in the middle were community leaders, farmers, activists, human rights defenders. Many of them were killed. When FARC signed peace with the government in 2016, thousands of square kilometers of jungle and coastline were left without a single dominant player. That was exactly what the Clan del Golfo had been waiting for. An organization that, within a few years, grew from a local band of ex-paramilitaries into Colombia's largest narco army. Its roots trace back to the AUC, United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia. When the AUC was formally dissolved in 2006, many of its members never laid down their weapons. Instead, they created their own criminal groups. The strongest of them were the Urabeños, named after the Urabá region near the Panamanian border. Over time, this group became known as the Clan del Golfo. This is not a cartel in the old sense. It is a network of interconnected cells operating across Colombia and beyond. They control ports on the Caribbean and Pacific coasts. They ship cocaine to Central America, from where it flows into Mexico. They have people embedded in the police, in local governments, even in town councils. Their structure is a hybrid of gang and army, combat units in the jungle, logisticians and financiers in the cities, networks of informants along smuggling routes. The Clan del Golfo is infamous for its brutal paros armados, armed shutdowns of towns and roads. These are demonstrations of power. They declare that for several days no one works, schools remain closed, and anyone who defies the order risks their life. Today, it is estimated they control 30 to 40% of Colombia's cocaine exports. They are a top priority for the DEA and Colombian Special Forces. Yet, thanks to their vast networks and corruption, they continue to operate like a state within a state. After Escobar, Medellín underwent a great transformation. A metro system, libraries, tourist-friendly districts. The world marveled at the urban miracle of Colombia. But beneath this new facade, something thrives that no travel guide ever shows. The combos, small gangs that control a few streets, sometimes just a single neighborhood. What unites them is loyalty to larger organizations, like the Clan del Golfo, and absolute control over the local community. Their businesses are everyday and silent. Extortion from shops, taxi drivers, and transport companies, control of local drug sales, regulating conflicts. If someone kills, steals, or cheats, it is not the police, but the combo that decides their fate. For many residents, these gangs are closer than the state. It is better to pay them a tax than to call the police, because the police may never come, or might sell the information about who made the call. Combos remain invisible in UN or DEA reports, yet they are the ones who decide whether you can open a store in a block, rent an apartment, or let your children play on the field. For years, the Colombian army boasted of its successes against the guerrillas. Thousands of eliminated fighters appeared in the reports. But in 2008, a scandal erupted that revealed the dark side of those statistics. It turned out that many of those so-called fighters were civilians, poor young men from towns and villages, kidnapped by the army, killed, and then dressed in FARC uniforms. Why? Because soldiers received bonuses, promotions, and rewards for combat results. Investigations uncovered hundreds of such cases, known as falsos positivos. For the families, it meant trauma, and the sense that the perpetrators would never be held accountable. Pablo Escobar died 3 decades ago, but in Colombia, he never really left the stage. Only now, he is not just a criminal from police reports, he is a pop culture icon. Series like Narcos created the global myth of the boss, charismatic, brutal, yet one of his own. On the streets of Medellín, you can buy T-shirts with his face, mugs with his quotes, fridge magnets. In nightclubs, reggaeton and corridos tumbados blast. songs glorifying the narco lifestyle. For some young Colombians, he is a role model. Fast money, expensive cars, respect in the neighborhood. The problem is that the myth sells a fantasy, while reality means fear, death, and prison. Narco fashion blurs the line between fiction and reality, and it ensures that new generations keep dreaming of the same thing Escobar once wanted, only faster and without consequences. Consequences that television never shows. Today, Colombia is not only a producer of cocaine, it is also a teacher. Colombian chemists and logisticians have for years been traveling to Bolivia, Peru, and even West Africa. There, they train local groups how to grow coca, how to refine cocaine, how to organize transport. West Africa has become a new transit point on the way to Europe. Colombian know-how, combined with corruption in weak African states, creates the perfect conditions for smuggling. UN data leaves no doubt. After 2020, Colombia has been producing more cocaine than at any time during Escobar's era. 3 decades of a war on drugs, billions of dollars poured into the military, thousands killed, and the result? Production at a record high. This is the paradox of Colombia. The death of Escobar did not end the cocaine era. It opened a new one, more global, quieter, harder to detect. Pablo Escobar was the face, the symbol. But he was not the entire empire. That empire survived his death. It changed leaders, methods, routes. Today it operates in silence and is stronger than ever. Colombia is a land of contrasts, tourist paradises and lawless zones, startups and gangs, peace declarations by day and executions by night. The death of Escobar was the end of an era, but not the end of the problem, because in Colombia, the narcos never left. If you want more stories about places where the state exists only on paper, about people who fight every day just to survive, about the mechanisms that operate in the shadows, then subscribe to this channel. Here we don't chase clickbait. Here we tell it as it is, even when it hurts. Thank you for being here. See you in the next film.